Good morning.
Good morning.
Today is God's day. My mom's favorite saying is, today is God's day. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Well, today I'm going to talk about something that I think many of the people in here in the community have heard many times, which is a world that works for everyone. This statement, a world that works for everyone, is a vision statement for the Centers for Spiritual Living. However, very often when we start to talk about a world that works for everyone, we forget about a world that works for me. In order to be compassion, you first have to start with self-love. In order to be inclusive, you first have to start with an understanding of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. In order to give love, you have to be able to receive love. Today I'm going to ask you to look inward at two things. The first one is, what really constitutes a world that works for me? Not because it's politically correct, or you think you ought to, but what really works for you? The second thing I'm going to ask you to look at is, what are you doing to take care of yourself before others? The benefit is that when you are authentically being who you are and taking care of yourself, physically, mentally, spiritually, then your own inner spiritual nature has the clarity and your heart has the expansiveness to be able to really take care and do for others. Also, when you are in this expansive state, you can actually be compassion, be caring, be love. It's just the nature of who you are at that point. And when you do this, you will start to feel more peace in your life. You know, that kind of inner peace that surpasses understanding with everything swirling around you. And have more joy. Does anybody here want more joy? Okay. So are you ready to get into this really deep work? Okay. So we're going to start with the first one I said, probing into a world that works for you. So I just want you to take a minute and think to yourself, what is a world that works for me? Okay. To find the complete answer to that, it's not going to happen in a 1-minute meditation. Here's the thing. To really find out what is a world that works for you, you have to dive into the question more deeply. You have to unpeel the layers of the onion. And you might be surprised by what you find. You might even be disturbed by what you find. Because most of us are a vault of contradictions. If our annual theme is, as I understand, values-based living, how can you live it until you understand what your values are? In my own process of peeling back the onion, which for me really started last November, I have discovered some things, and I want to share them with you. You see, I'm a proud Republican. I've always been a proud Republican, and I'm still a proud Republican. So November of last year wasn't really that big a deal for me. I have dealt with Republican bashing since I was a child. I can remember when I was in elementary school, Park School down here in Mill Valley, and we had a mock election. I found out really quickly what an outcast I was. So here in this blue state, I've had that problem all along. So November was no different. But here's the difference. After the election, it didn't slow down this time, right? The election didn't stop it. It got worse. I'm used to being put into those Republican statements. But I don't want to get into the details, but one person actually said to me right after the election, any woman who voted the Republican ticket was just brainwashed by her husband. Of course, they didn't know my leanings. They're a very good friend of mine. But it's one of those things where you just presume you know what the other person is thinking. It became so commonplace, or has become so commonplace in our spiritual circles to bash our current president, that I began to question what has been hanging out for me when hanging out with all these people that are they so diametrically opposed to me? I thought they were my best friends. I thought they were my spiritual community. I had to question, have I been lying to myself about what I believe? And so it took me on this discovery of what is a world that works for me. For a while, I had to pull away from some of my social circles. I even started to begin to question my spiritual beliefs because, you see, everyone was lumping Republicans in with the religious right. Well, if I'm being shunned by my own communities, maybe I am a part of the religious right. So I better go check that out. And the truth is, in some of those more conservative settings, do match better with my values with regards to patriotism and maybe some more conservative sexual morals, etc. And I like those people. But I realized I can't really hang out here because I would be a spiritual imposter. What I'm saying is that as we start to discover who we are, we have to really get detailed. And one of the things I learned is that as adults, we're not much different than teenagers. Okay? Now let's talk about teenagers, or particularly preteens. You remember how when you're preteen, you start to dress like all your friends? And then, there's a certain icon that everybody likes, and you all of a sudden you're listening to that band, They kind of move around in packs. True? Okay. As adults, we're not that much different. We're just more sophisticated about it. Try this on. You go to a new company. First day, you wear a suit, right? You notice everybody's in casual attire. So you start dressing to fit more in. I know for myself, I have a whole wardrobe of a woman's spirit clothing that I would never be caught dead in at work. Okay? So here's what happens, though, is a lot of times you might say, what is the problem with this adult desire to adapt to the culture or environment they're in? The problem is that sometimes we don't even notice that we've adapted. And what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is when you don't know that you have adapted, there may be a mismatch between what your kind of outward values are and what's really underneath. Do you know how to boil a frog? If you put a frog in a pot of boiling water, it will jump out. The frog is not stupid, okay? But if you put a frog in a pot of boiling water and then slowly turn up the heat, you will end up with a dead boiled frog. The same thing happens to you. If there is a cultural change around you, and then little by little, you just adapt, you might not even notice that you have adapted. The problem is your core values and structures internally didn't change unless you consciously updated them. Now you think you value one thing, X, Y, Z. You even think X, Y, Z is a good thing. You're even posting about XYZ on your Facebook page. And yet, internally, you really still have this ABC thought. Ever thought, why don't my affirmations work? Why don't my spiritual mind treatments work? Until you've peeled back this onion and found what's under there that is actually your more core belief, it's not going to work. That's why we have these beautiful practitioners. These beautiful practitioners can help you to find those hidden beliefs. I think there is a great movie that portrays this very, very well. How many of you remember A Few Good Men? Okay. It's a movie about a court case where the lawyer is examining about something that happened in a Guantanamo-based kind of military setting. And he's got the colonel from that base on. So Caffrey is the lawyer, Colonel Jessup is the colonel. And Caffrey says, "I want the truth." And Colonel Jessup says, "You can't handle the truth." Jessup goes on to say, "You don't want the truth because deep down in places you don't talk about at parties, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall." Deep down, you don't want the truth because places that you wouldn't talk about at parties are there. I'm asking you, look inside yourself. What are the places that you have hidden there that you don't talk about at parties because it doesn't fit with your social circles, or you don't even want to admit to yourself that you believe that? But it's there until you confront it. And I personally got to see this inner conflict myself. And I think, and this is Judith, personal feeling, that most prejudice and all wars are really based on this internal conflict that individuals still hold on to. Many of you know, I'll give you an example in my life of this onion peeling, that I do interfaith work. It's what I do. It's my passion. I've been on the Islamic Networks Group, Interfaith Speakers Bureau, and taking people into high schools and colleges with Jewish and Muslim and Buddhist people sitting next to her and having panel discussions. It's what I do. Totally unrelated to my interfaith work, that recently this year, I went to Kyrgyzstan on a U.S. delegation trip to support science and technology for women. This country, Kyrgyzstan, is an ex-Soviet country. So for the many past years, they were a secular community. But before that, and their deep spiritual roots are more shamanistic, more closely related to our Native American traditions, or maybe Shinto Japanese traditions. But post their independence, they have become mainly an Islamic state. And one of the things I noticed when I was there is almost every city had almost a brand new mosque. And this brand new mosque was built by a foreign actor, not necessarily by the people. And I found it a little disturbing for me. And I'm like, well, this doesn't make sense. You know, you're totally for pluralism. You're for freedom of choice with regards to religion. I mean, it's what you stand for. You know, well, Christians evangelize. They go in and put things. Why is this disturbing to you? And as I started to think about it, for me it's like turning up the heat slowly on the frog. First, the mosque is just there. And the mosque is just there, and people can go or not. And then it becomes normal that there's a mosque in every town. And then the next thing you know, it's normal to go to the mosque. I thought, well, why does this bother me? You are completely for freedom of choice of what people want for living. So I had to peel back the onion further. And here's where I found the ugly truth about myself. I'm for freedom of choice. I'm for going to the mosque here in Mill Valley. I've been 1,000,000 times when I'm in the majority position. But if it became that I was in a minority position, And the majority of people happened to be Muslim, and we were run by a Sharia law. Ooh, there's that thing I don't want to talk about at parties that's sitting there. Here's what I'm going to ask each one of you to do. Look at take something in your life where you are in the majority position, and then try on. If I wasn't in the majority position and everybody else was this and I'm this, how do you feel? So you might start with, race. Then you might try on political beliefs. You might try your religious and spiritual understandings. And then, if there's any place where it comes up and you're feeling, I'm a little uncomfortable about that, that's where there might be a disconnect from what your outward stated values are and what your inward true belief or comfort level is. And that's where the work begins, in creating a world that works for you and a world that works for everyone. This is hard work, so everybody breathe. And I'm going to switch direction of the talk, because at the beginning of the talk, I said I was going to talk about two things. What really constitutes a world that works for you, not because it's politically correct or you think you ought to, but what really works for you. And then, what are you doing to take care of yourself before others? So you might think in a talk about compassion that talking about what you're doing for yourself and before others is a little strange. I mean, after all, didn't Jesus say, love thy neighbor as thyself? And doesn't that mean I'm supposed to take care of my neighbor? Well, yes, it does mean you're supposed to take care of your neighbor. But I want you to listen to what he said very, very closely. He said, love thy neighbor as thyself, which means if you're not loving yourself, you are not doing the commandment. Thus, if you are not living in a world that works for you, you are not creating a world that works for everyone. So let's back away from everyone for a minute, because that might be a little daunting, and go to creating a world that works for a loved one. Because here, I've known most of the people in this room for many years, and I know there are really loving, open-hearted, caring people in this room. That's who you are. And I know that there are some people in this room right now who are dealing with situations of a loved one or have in their recent past where they needed to give a lot of care and compassion. And sometimes what comes up is an internal conflict, because sometimes the conflict in what you want to do because your soul wants to give all the love and compassion in the world and what you need don't match. And here's where we get the great spiritual lesson from airplanes. You all know it. You've heard it a million times. Put the oxygen mask on yourself before putting an oxygen mask on others. Now, just so you don't think I'm so good at all of this, I failed at that a little bit with my 93-year-old mother this week. She's having some memory issues and needing a little extra care, and we lost a caregiver, and she said she'd be fine doing everything on her own on Thursday, but I just kind of felt I should go check and make sure she took her meds. Now, Thursday mornings I usually go to my water aerobics class, but I didn't go. I went over to Mom's because I thought, it's a weekday, and I've been needing to fix the SIVA frame, and I can only do that between 9 and 5. And so I went over, and I first started with the SIVA frame, called the tech support. You all know where that's going. So maybe I wasn't as quite compassionate at the end of the call as I was when I first walked in, joyfully wanting to help my mom with her meds. And then my mom started spinning about her hair appointment because she needed to get a hair appointment. And that seemed to be like the overwhelming concern. So I was very happy when the hairdresser called, and I was there because she's hard of hearing. She can never hear what they say. And so I was able to set an appointment, and I went over to her all proud. Mom, I got the hair appointment. Said it's next Wednesday at noon, and she started yelling at me. Because I can't do it at noon. That's exactly the time I go to Friends. That's the only time I ever see anybody who cares about me. Okay, I'm here, but Anyway, I went ahead and called the hairdresser back, and she said the only time she could do the hair appointment was at noon. And so I said, Mom, you have a choice. It's only one day in 1 week. Do you want the hair appointment or do you want this? And this caused let's just say I ended up not being as compassionate as I kind of wanted to. And then, of course, what happens next? I go home. Maybe you're not like me, but, and I'm swirling about how I wasn't compassionate enough and why couldn't I have just calmed down? And 2.5 days, I'm spinning out. When here's what I should have done. I should have gone to water aerobics. My mom was not expecting me, right? This was me being compassionate, right? My mom was not expecting me. She's expecting me tonight. Now instead, tonight she'll probably still be reeling about it. It took me 2.5 days, which means it'll take her at least a week to get over it. So tonight, when I'm supposed to be there, it'll be a different thing. Whereas if I had done the thing that was right the first time, taking care of myself, it would have been fine. Some of you might not be caring for an individual, so I want to bring this to more if you're the social justice type and your overwhelming concern is one of the many things that we might want to shift in the world today. And my sister sent me this article, and I thought it was so good. This was from, it's a Quaker magazine, and it's to stay inspired and motivated and engaged in social activism. And they asked different social activists and activist leaders what they do, and I want to read one of them to you. So this is whether you're dealing with a personal thing or whether you're dealing with a global issue. This is all good advice. This is from, the question was, how do you care for yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritual? When engaged in social change? This is from Greg Colburn, the director of Social Justice Leadership Institute in Philadelphia. Here's what he said. Spiritually, it's about meditation and prayer. It's the hardest thing to do, to practice stillness and detachment. Physically, it's yoga, working out, eating right, and sometimes not eating right, like treating yourself to the favorite food. Mentally, breathing, allowing yourself to slow down, and be realistic about what you can and can't do capacity-wise. Emotionally, being aware if you are burning out, and being careful of what you consume. Choose the right people to hang around with. Choose to engage and when to disengage. Pick your spots. The work is so draining. Doing this work is desiring of your full balance. But if you don't take care of yourself, you can fall into a savior complex. When you are building your identity around helping others, and you don't feel valued when you are doing nothing. See, people get afraid of falling behind, but social justice is not a competition. Remember the things that make you smile, and do them. Produce as much joy as you can, both internally and externally. We all affect each other. So, as you are thinking about these things, when you are in joy and filled with joy and being authentically you, you can be compassion. It's just natural. It's who you're wired to be. But if you're doing something out of a sense of obligation or because you ought to, then you're just being codependent, and that's not compassionate. So to recap, the first step is to determine what is a world that works for you. How much energy do you truly have? How much sleep do you need? What spiritual enrichment do you need? What brings you joy? And once you do that, now you're in a position to expand your heart out to others. The second step is to do the tough digging into the outer things that make a world that works for you. And if you find conflicts, you have two choices. One is to do the work to update the inner value, that deep one that you don't want to talk about at parties, to match what your outer world view is. In which case, see any of these practitioners here. They're trained to help you with that. The second thing is, and I want to speak this one really clearly, it's okay to want a world that works for you. If it comes up that really that is how you want it to be, live authentically about that. Once you've determined what works for you, talk about it at parties. The worst thing to do is to be fake and act like you are one thing, but have a core belief that is something else, even if you're uncomfortable with it. I think a good example of this comes from further on in that same scene with Colonel Jessup. He goes on to say, we use words like honor, code, and loyalty. We use these words as the backbone of a life spent defending something. You use them as a punchline. Let's not make a world that works for everyone just a punchline. And that starts with having an understanding and living authentically a world that works for you. I'm going to close today with a quote on how Ernest might have said the same thing about self-care and being authentic. And then we're going to go straight into the inner work. So if the practitioners want to go ahead and surround the room now, that'd be a great time. This quote is from The Science of Mind, page 435, if you're following along. It's in a section that's called Self-Healing Must Come First of All. If we think we can guide our brother aright while our own feet are still walking in darkness, we are mistaken. We must first clarify our own vision. Then we shall become the lights, lighting the way for others. But we can't teach a lesson we have not yet learned. We can't give that which we do not possess. To suppose so is hypocrisy, a thing to be shunned. So in this community, in this very space right here, there is quite enough love to heal the world and to heal ourselves. It starts with recognizing that I am one with that infinite power and that infinite presence in the universe. I have a faith and a knowing that all there is God. All there is love. That means that I am connected with each and every person in the universe, with each and every being in the universe. For that mind of God is my mind. It is only in my contradictions that I get confused. And so remembering the truth of my being, which is that I am the mind, essence, and spirituality of the entire universe, encapsulated as this individual known as Judith. When I remember that, and remember that there is no difference from me and you, that we are all spiritual beings living in this divine essence, then I know that we can truly have a world that works for me and a world that works for everyone. For we are all one. And so in this place, I claim a shift in consciousness right now, right here, for each person. That whatever the next step on your personal journey is, that you are able to come to that conclusion of what works for a world for you. and that you shift and update each and every one of those things with ease and joy and a new realization that there is nothing blocking you, blocking me, blocking anyone from the truth of who we all are. And so in this knowing, I just give thanks. I give thanks for the healing that is occurring in mind, body, and spirit as we do the work. And knowing that it is done first in the mind of God, all I have to do is wait for those happy reports and those smiling beings in a world working for love. And so it is.
Because the ground holds up my feet, because the stars shine down on me, for all of this and so much more, I am grateful. Because there's air for me to breathe, I give my thanks to every tree for all of this and so much more. I am grateful. Grateful, I'm grateful, 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 I'm grateful, because I felt right from the start the steady beat of my faithful heart, for all of this and so much more, I am because I think, because I feel, because there's mystery to reveal, for all of this and so much more, I am grateful. Grateful, grateful, I'm grateful, grateful, grateful.